Today's class is going to Mussar class is going to be on generosity, and sort of a no-brainer. But hopefully today we're going to learn some things. Now, what has been the purpose of Mussar? And that is to reflect, bring self-improvement, to sort of bring ourselves to a higher level. All of us give, but there's a difference between tzedakah and generosity. And we're going to talk about the differences. Exodus 25, verse 1 through 2, and then verse 8 says this. And God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that they should take a gift for me. From every person whose heart moves him, you should take my gift, and let them build me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst." The Hebrew word for generosity is nedivut. A generous person is a nadiv, right? Mussar clearly distinguishes this type of generosity from others called tzedakah or obligated giving, such as tithing. Nedivut type generosity comes not from obligation, nor rational thought, nor guilt, but out of irresistible feeling that stirs within the deep. You know you're a generous person if whenever an opportunity comes, you can't restrain yourself from giving. And sometimes you don't have it, but you want to do something about it. You want to fix the situation. That is the telltale sign of a person who's truly generous. Now, I would say that in our study of Torah and understanding of generosity, we understand that it's just as much a mitzvah to be careful how you give your money as it is to give your money. So a truly generous person is compelled beyond their own logic and reason to want to give or to do something to help, and yet have to put it in check and make sure it's the right thing. The other day, someone typed in our local community Facebook that they were looking for clothes for their children. Now, anybody that would post that on Facebook has to be in a pretty tight situation, and it must be a very humbling situation to say, "I need clothes for my children for school." And I was so impressed by people who very generously began to say, "Hey, I have this or that," and some people suggesting that they would go and do some shopping and bring back and have clothes for them. It's great to live in a generous society. Our country is a very generous country. We're probably one of the highest, donors of charity projects in the world. It's a mark to our great system that we have. But godly people should be even more generous. But we're not just talking about generosity in our money, but a generosity in our attitude, in our mussar, in our character. The overall goal of mussar is to help us really live as the holy souls that we are. To move toward holiness, we must yearn for it. Holiness does not come without a deep, abiding yearning, an ownership of our relationship with the Creator. It's something that's not existential. It's not outside of us, but it's something that is very internal and inside us. God is not out there. God is with us. God is part of who we are. And when we say our generosity, it's not about a mechanism out here. It's about this as your human being. Am I a generous person that gives out? Why do we want to be generous? Because the Creator of the universe is a giver. Just the very essence of the Creator. Now, we've had this ad nauseum discussion that God is not a human being, so it's not like He gives, right? He doesn't hand you something. But just by His nature, He is constantly vibrating the energy of gift and goodness and purity and life. All of that just comes out. It's not like He chooses. It is who He is. The Creator is generous. What stops generosity is not the Creator, but whom? We stop it, right? One must be propelled by spiritual willingness, and here's the Hebrew word, nedivut halev. What is that? Generosity of the heart. Generosity of the heart is so important. Because we live in a money-centric culture, we tend to think of generosity only as a question reaching into our wallets or our bank accounts. But as a midot, generosity is a trait of the soul. This is the difference. It's not a trait of the wallet. It's not a trait of your bank account. It's a trait of the soul. And so it can be we can find expression in many ways, including how to share your time, your energy, your possessions, when your heart is guided by an open, trusting, volunteer-inspired internal motivation that overflows from the depth of your caring response to the needs or love for another. You always find a way to respond. We have a very generous community. Everybody in this community. You look at our little Facebook chat, us poor men are just chatted out half the time. But you ladies are so generous. Somebody will type, hey, I'm dealing with this, and boom, you guys just are right on it and suggesting things and coming up with what solutions. That is a great mark of a very generous community. If you have money in your pocket, you give money. If you have no money, but there's food in your home, you give food. If there's no food in your home, but ideas in your mind that will give helping words, if there are no words in your mouth, but you love in your heart, then you offer your heart itself. Let's talk about barriers and beggars. Barriers and beggars. Although we are naturally inclined to give, we can act on that inclination only when our heart is open. Our heart is open. When our hearts are closed or walled off, we suffer from an element that the Mussar teachers called titum halev, literally mean a plugged up heart. Titum halev. Now, let me ask you, what do you think stops the Creator's generosity toward us? Our lack of generosity to others. How do we open up the avenue of generosity to ourselves? By being generous to others. Now look, I have to be honest with you. I've always operated under the philosophy, I'm sure you have too, that if I show mercy, people will show me mercy. If I show kindness, people show me kindness, etc., etc. Those all sound good in a great world, right? But you and I both know there are some people out there who operate from a different moral code, and they're not that way, right? But, Baruch Hashem, when I've needed mercy, God has given me mercy through other people because I've shown mercy, right? When I've needed loving kindness from someone at that time, somehow somebody has showed me some loving kindness. And it's a great way to live your life. None of us want to live a plugged up heart. Instead of being open and flowing and generous, we're sluggish, constipated, and unwilling at the core to give. We're restrictive. Anytime we have an opportunity, hear an opportunity to give, we go, don't want to do that. We don't want to be that. Why does this happen to us? If the heart is generous by nature, how does its flow get to be so obstructed that we live without being generous? And what can we do about it? Sometimes we end up with timtum halev, a plugged up heart, because we willingly block our hearts. We build barriers to separate ourselves from others. In India, you would hear disparaging stories of professional beggars who earn a fortune off of the unwary mothers who mutilated their children so they will become successful at begging, and so on. These stories are likely untrue in the population of 1 billion people, a high proportion of whom are very poor and very disabled. But stories like this circulate because they are useful for building a wall around our hearts. I had someone the other day call me about the Christian, the Fellowship of Christian and Jews. Does that sound right? Yeah. International Fellowship of Christian Jews. Right. And said, every time I see this, I'm thinking they're trying to balk us. It was a Christian person. Every time trying to balk us out of money, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no, it's a very worthy organization. I mean, these guys do a lot of amazing things. It's like, well, how many poor Holocaust survivors are there in Ukraine? I said, it's immaterial if they're helping to feed these people on a regular basis. Some of these people have no Social Security system like we have. And they're in their 90s and they're barely getting by with a little bit of bread and tea that they have each day. And so so whenever we see this, sure, we should follow up. But we want to be people that are open about our sensitivity to others. Now, since we talked about the beggar or the excuse of using a situation not to give, here's a prime example. When I come back from the doctor, there's always someone begging at this particular intersection, FM 1960 at 45. You know what I'm talking about? Southbound, 1960. They're always standing there. And I don't always give to them. But there's sometimes I'll see an individual and I go, I need to give to him, right? Well, it doesn't make sense to me. All I know is I just follow an intuition. And can I be promised that I'm giving this person something and he's not going to go buy crack? No, I don't have that. But at some level, I feel like I'm using some judgment to go, I see this person here all the time with their two friends. I don't know. But sometimes I change my mind. That is something we expect. Can you see any ways in which you build walls around your heart? I know a way that we can build walls around our heart, especially being in a former religious life that we are. How would you say would be a way? All of the religious things on TV that are bilking millions out of people. The other day, my wife, the TV had to be reprogrammed. It was like 15 channels of Christian television. Every one of them are selling everything from miracle oil to water to splinters of the cross, you name it. What? I need a new jet, exactly. That can be the wall around a person's heart who came out of idolatry and avodah zarah and now won't give to organizations that support the teaching of Torah. It's a wall. And trust me, it's an impenetrable wall that will also block your ability to gain Torah. If we are stingy with our generosity, then we will not be able to receive Torah as we need. That's number one. Can you think of a situation where someone might benefit from your generosity, but you maintain comfortably cut off from them by the wall? Is there someone in your workplace who seems to be in need, but you don't want to get involved because you only have a working relationship after all, or it's someone at school who seems lonely, someone in the community that seems to be having a difficult time, but you're the only one that sees it. And what's your contribution? What's your little bit of gift? How can that really help? I can tell you that little bit can mean a whole lot. It's good to give. It's good to give. Closed-heartedness isn't all done by us. However, sometimes it's done to us. Life experience can play its part on shutting down the heart. The heart wants to be open, but sometimes it is not capable in the face of brutal battering. It has been, and in the way it's been handled, we can emphasize with people need to close off their hearts, and yet if it is we who have been the victim and we accept that situation, we do a different kind of violence to the heart. When your heart is closed, you're among the first who suffer from the closure. Remember, a lack of generosity hurts you as much as it would hurt someone that is in need. I don't know of anybody in this room that's not a generous person, so I'm not pointing this to you specifically. But just as we talked about patience, help me with the other one. Just as we talk about humility, all of us can learn to step up a little extra to practice this. Here's a quote from Shinyor Zalman. Says this: most of us know from experience that it feels good to give. Why is that, considering that generosity doesn't seem to offer the donor any direct benefit? We all see the benefit of it, but sometimes how can it be beneficial to you if you don't actually get anything out of it? But the reality is we all get something out of it. even if nobody knows it. I know many of you have come to me and said, I want to donate something to someone, but don't let them know I donated it. That's very beautiful, and it's sweet, because it's such a great gift to give it to someone and then to let them know, well, that person doesn't want anybody to know. It's also an encouragement to that person when it's time for them to give, to do the same thing. The answer is that when we give, we receive one of the greatest satisfaction that a human being can know, which is to feel connected to others. Our hearts are programmed to connect and generously satisfy that need. And the giver gets another satisfaction as well. Having a plugged up heart is an element. Every act of generosity dissolves the blockage. If you want to know how to clean out the hardening of the giving arteries, right? Then you need to take the lipitor of generosity.
Amen.
Right? Take the lipitor of generosity. Unclog your heart. The hardening of the arteries. There you go. But it's important that generosity is the key. Think about this. You just realized what I said?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of out of it.
That's all right.
I liked it.
That's all right. What causes real artery blockage? What's the name of the product that gets plaque? And eating too much fat. Fat, according to Torah, and the giving of an offering means what? When you give the fat of the animal on the altar, you are giving over the pleasure of the animal nature. What causes the buildup of blockage in our own heart is when we consume our own pleasure and we're not generous. Do you understand? When you're generous, you're cutting the fat, you're trimming it down, and you're making your life much more helpful. Last but not least, bearing the burden. Ask yourself, do I give spontaneously from the heart? If you're aware that the condition of timtum halav, blockage obstructing the heart, applies to you, then one Mussar approach is to identify the medot at the source of this, and what is it? Why would we not want to give? What would be the thing that would cause us not to give to something?
Worry about lack.
Worry about lack. Fear. Well, what happens if I give and I need and I don't have? A lack of faith. Because if I give to the proper situation, then Hashem will make sure that I'm taken care of. So blockage obstructing the heart applies to us. Then one must approach identify this source as being fear, and to work on these specific soul traits. The fears that restrain us can be strong, and the scars that constrain us can be hard. So you should expect to be persistent and remember compassionate. Be compassionate to yourself at the same time. Know that it's difficult if you've been hurt before. Know that people that you've given to have hurt you. And listen, every one of us in this room has probably had relationships in which you gave, and you gave generously to someone, and it turned around and bit you. Am I right? Yeah. And hurt you. But can you use that as an excuse to not give again? Well, I guess we could, but we shouldn't. Why? Because we don't want to cause blockage ourselves. Another approach applies more for people whose hearts are being enslaved to ego. This is important. Where the inner voice says, how can I give when I don't even have enough for me? Here you might cultivate a sense that what you do for others is actually a great gift to yourself. No one loses. Rabbi Simcha Zisel Ziv, the founder of the Kelm School of Mussar, explained how bearing the burden of the other is a profound spiritual practice. He begins as his example the story of Moshe, who began his spiritual journey cocooned in Pharaoh's palace, but immediately became the greatest of the prophets by responding to the suffering that he saw around him. And because he saw the suffering around him later, God said, I heard the suffering and heard the cries of the people and send Moshe to them. The idea of bearing burdens of the other is stated by the same Rabbi Simcha Zissel, was articulating a spiritual method pointed out by his own teacher, Rabbi Israel Salanter. In one of his most memorable sayings, Rabbi Salanter commented, the spiritual is higher than the physical, but the physical needs are an obligation of my spiritual life. In order that I can follow my spiritual path, I have to pay attention to the physical needs of others. If I pay attention to the physical needs of others, then I can be guaranteed that Hashem will pay attention to my own physical needs. Last but not least, the classic teacher Rabbi Nachman of Breslov teaches that anyone who does not practice generosity has a heart of stone. Don't think about it too much. Don't analyze it. When it's an opportunity to be generous, present itself. No inner debate is called for us. Just do it. That's how you thaw the frozen heart. Each act of generosity works to pry open the heart little by little, like clearing a blockage stream, one pebble at a time. The flow spontaneously is then freed to follow. So how do we break the lack of generosity? Is every time you get an opportunity, do it. Like I said, if you don't have money, give what you have. If you have time, give your time. If you have talent, give your talent. But whatever it takes, be generous people. And so this week is a week of generosity. Look for opportunities to be generous, question yourself, and even critique yourself if there's a moment that you see that you could be generous and you'd go, yeah, let somebody else do it. Right? Now, obviously, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Don't go on a guilt trip. But the problem is many of us have had opportunities to give that we don't give, not because we don't have it, but we don't want to. It's a big difference. That concludes the shiur. We'll go on now to question and answers. The idea is that what we learn in just these first few verses is that God has a design for us to engage in Him and to engage in our relationship with Him. It's very specific, it's very designed, it's very orderly. And if you want to be able to understand that and plug into it, we have to be able to specifically apply the things that God has asked us to apply to connect to Him. Tom mentioned, well, the presence of God is everywhere in the world. Why is it that it says that God's Shekinah or divine presence is here, is at this place? What's the difference? And the best way that I could explain it to Tom was this, is energy is around us at all times. All times. But if I really want to tap into, or if I want to know where the energy is, I have to go to a socket where it can be connected into, right? For some reason, the divine presence is everywhere in the world. It's in everything in the world. But the very concentrated Shekinah presence of God is going to be in one place, and it's going to be in the third temple. It will be concentrated to a level that people will not have to emotionally engage. It will be there, and there will be no doubt that it's there. It's not going to be a religious fervor. It's going to be a knowing. It's like, as I mentioned to Tom, coming out of the hot air and coming into a cold house. You know the air conditioning's on. You don't have to imagine it. You don't have to get emotionally excited about it. It just is. It's on all the time. In the closing of this short shiurim, we want to find the practical application to the text that we've learned today, and that is this. As righteous of the nations who are really striving to contact and connect to God in a very unique and special way, we cannot choose to do it our way. We must choose the way that God has prescribed. God has prescribed this way through the Sheva Mitzvot. He has prescribed it also by the teaching of the sages of Judaism. And the study of Judaism gives us points of meditation, gives us scriptures to study on, gives us the wonderful works of Psalm to read, etc., etc. There are so many ways to connect, but our only proper way to connect is through the Torah, the studying of Torah. and the learning of Torah. How do we then begin to see that energy and divine presence sort of operate in our life? Is when we take Torah and make it into action. When we help others, when we give tzedakah, charity, when we are merciful, when we are kind to other people, we are showing the attributes of the Creator of the universe. That concludes the short shiurim, and we're going to get into the discussion of the text. Yes?
I'd like